Okay.
2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. I was very, very calm on Sunday morning. I'm doing my Baltimore positive. Things are normal. I'm getting ready for Lamar Jackson like everybody else. And Michael Olesker drops a piece, the venerable longtime columnist of the News American, the Baltimore Sun, a guy I've known all my life, in regard to the Orioles being sold and or moved. In general, the Orioles are going to go on the block at some point because it looks like the Angelos boys are not going to own and operate them, thankfully. And we will turn the page. This guy has been my friend for going on a decade, talking about all things Masson, money, the franchise, who's going to be the commissioner, baseball on the field even a little bit because he is a baseball fan. Longtime Sports Business Journal insider, now at Sport Business as the U.S. editor for the Sport Business Group, Eric Fisher. You can follow him at Eric Fisher SBG now out on Twitter. First things first, man, big career change for you. Kudos, bravo, all that stuff. And I know I experienced some frustration sometime at SPJ about a wall and a story and whatever because it was not inexpensive to subscribe. It was not 99 cents a month and 99 cents down. But it's Sport Business. You've made this move a couple months ago. I haven't had you on, and I guess there's been not a whole lot of movement in the Masson thing since the beginning of the year, so I tend to bother you 3 or 4 times a year when the Angeloses are suing someone, right? But you've made a move, so give me the new deal on Sport Business, and then we're going to just tear this thing apart because, quite frankly, you're among that handful of people I think who knows more about this than anybody, Eric.
Yeah, so where I'm at now, it's another sports industry trade publication, but we're global. This is a London-based operation that's been in existence since the mid-'90s, similar to my prior employer, but they're making a big expansion not only in the States, which I'm overseeing, but also in Asia. And we have a new office in Singapore where there's a counterpart to me and a whole sales team that's handling that part of the world. So between Europe, Asia, and North America, we're a truly global operation.
The business of sports is global, dude, right? I mean, you know, we hear this and we feel this, and I guess this brings me to the front door of why I called, right? You read the piece from Michael Olesker on Sunday. I've had a chance to chat with Michael and get some background in all, like where's all this stuff come from, right? And I can only say this. He's 90 years old. He's not going to own it forever, right? He's obviously in failing health. It has not been well run, as we can all sit and attest to, and I can kick that around, and I've written books about that. And everyone who's ever chronicled Peter Angelos over 25 years, I have been his biographer in real time. But you realize this is not forever. Nothing's forever. George Steinbrenner wasn't forever. Steve Bisciotti's not forever either. But for the Orioles and for Major League Baseball, give me this at 100,000 feet as you see it, because I'm not the one saying the Orioles are headed to Nashville or Las Vegas. I'm the one yelling, our city's on fire, and there's not a whole lot of money here, and the next guy in might not view this as a cute little, quaint little franchise. He might look at this as a $1.8 billion global franchise that might look better in Mexico City, and the new line of Major League Baseball owners might get greedier than they already are, because I've seen how this has worked for 30 years. If you have a lot of money, they like you. If you don't, they don't. And right now, we're not perceived as such. Not by the orange con man running the country either, who beat the city down 2 weeks ago. It's not a good time to be in the business of owning a Baltimore franchise this moment, right?
So, the basic level, the first immediate level of all of this is what you said at the beginning. That Peter Angelos is getting up there in years. He's in failing health. He is not the day-to-day operator of this franchise anymore, hasn't been for some time. But there has not been an official designated control change like there was in New York after George Steinbrenner died, or like there was last year with Washington, where the baton was formally passed from Ted Lerner to his son Mark. And this is that sort of formalistic change, which may seem symbolic, is actually a real thing because it designates not only to the league, but to the entire public and the market at large that there is a new sheriff in town, so to speak. And that piece of it hasn't happened. And unless and until that happens, that creates a lot of nebulousness in terms of what the direction of the franchise is. So that's number one piece of this. And then number two piece of this is that this is all coinciding with a major retrenching competitively, obviously, for the franchise where they're trying to rebuild here, and compared to what we've seen some other markets like Cincinnati that have also done teardowns and are actually starting to show some progress, particularly on the pitching side, jury's still very much out as to what kind of traction the Orioles rebuild is happening. So if you put all that together, it creates a lot of uncertainty in the market, but it would help a whole heck of a lot if there was just at least some clear designation in terms of who the control partner is for this franchise.
Well, I go back to the beginning of all of this and the Expos, and Eric, I always like to paint your picture a little bit here, because when I bring people on, I'm just not plucking people out of the crowd. You first off, an attorney, a guy who covered all of the Washington Nationals' existence when they thought they were going to be the Senators, when the Expos were playing games in Puerto Rico, when antitrust was involved in all of this. You covered all of this from the inside out at the Washington Times. So, you're more intimately familiar with this maybe on the inside than anyone, because you saw all of this get pieced together the last time, the only time really in our lifetime that Major League Baseball's moved the franchise. And moving franchises is not what they do, and everything's glacial paced and everything's slow and everything's buddy and Rob Manfred and all that stuff. Dude, Tampa's bleeding, Oakland's bleeding, the Orioles are bleeding, and it feels to me like Portland, Montreal, Nashville, these places, maybe not Vegas because they have 2 new kids in town, but some of these places might be ready to roll their sleeves up and go Oklahoma City, or the way the Predators have taken over Nashville, that there might be room in Montreal for a baseball team because there's 2 million people there. I've done the math on all of this. There's a part of this where if the perception is Baltimore's going into the river and the Orioles aren't what they were in 2005, which was a 7-state powerhouse, the St. Louis Cardinals of the region, they're not that anymore. And it's a damaged franchise in a lot of ways. And if you're buying this for $1.2 billion, 5, 8, the network, what happens to that? You don't get the DC market. It's over with. Angelos would have taken all the money out of that. So when you buy it as an entity now, you have to go to Baltimore and sell it to Baltimoreans. And all of the problems that Tagliabue had with putting a football team here, which is you hit your head at the Susquehanna and you drive 10 minutes south and you're in Columbia and there's Redskins and national stuff everywhere now, that we've now been squeezed into a really strange place that when a buyer comes in and says, where's the money coming from locally for this franchise, when you're not squeezing it out of a cable bill at $3.50 a head anymore? I don't know where the money's coming from, Eric. I mean, that's the part that worries me. The foundational part of this is the economics of what the future of the Baltimore Orioles looks like, and the future of Major League Baseball, and a fight with the Players Association, and what that could represent over the hill the next 5 years.
Well, I know you're there, and with all due respect, I guess I'm not quite as dire. I think it's there's some serious issues at play, but
I'm seeing the Ravens bleed right now, though. You know what I mean?
The point I'm trying to make is here, if the Orioles, I think you could probably spend a lot of time looking at the Milwaukee Brewers. Not a lot of people there. Smallest media market in the league, constrained. The line that I remember writing at one point, that you basically got Chicago to the south, Lake to the east, and cows and trees to the north and west. There's not a lot up there, but they crush it, and they crush it because you've got a good ballpark, you've got really most important engaged ownership, and they win. And again, if we had a clear direction as to what the ownership situation was, and they went out there and got their house in order competitively, this thing could be a viable franchise. I
agree with all of that. I don't disagree, but I also agree. I also think if I had my druthers and I'm just Mr. Big, I'd be looking at Nashville, you know what I mean? I'd be looking at Austin, Texas. I'd be looking at Montreal if I were a Canadian guy trying to sell beer or whatever I'm trying to do, because the consortium that would take this on, the dream that there are 6 really big local people here willing to put $300 million apiece into this, that there's a Kevin Plank and a Cal Ripken and a Bill Miller and and 3 Steve Bisciottis we've never heard of who've made their money in wherever. The dream of making it this Green Bay Packers thing, I don't know. I don't know who the buyer is. And the smart people that I've talked to this week off the record have all said, all I'm interested in is who wants it, who really has $2 billion and wants to be in the club and wants to resurrect Baltimore, and or maybe they do want to move it, and whether Major League Baseball would cough, grab the scrotum, cough, look the other way, the way all the NFL owners did on St. Louis, the way they've done on other places, the way the NBA did on places, where you just say, yeah, Baltimore, it's nice and it had its time, but it's shrinking and we're growing and, it was nice, but it's over. And hey, man, I mean, they did that to us with the Colts, so yeah, I don't get my feelings in this. And I know there's a lot of history of, well, Major League Baseball doesn't act that way. They don't act that way till they're desperate. And a couple of years from now, if they get kicked in the nuts with a union deal, things could really change dramatically in 5 years, for the better or for the worse, right? And we're talking about baseball right now in really sort of morbid tones in a lot of ways because the game's not very good. And that's another, we'll get to that later, but right now the game feels like it's going into some sort of old white guy, like sort of depression from a marketplace standpoint. And with 8 or 10 teams tanking, that kind of adds on, man. Like the game's in sort of a weird position right now.
Yeah, which is why they've started the labor talks a couple of years early to try to get out in front of this and see what they can do to correct this. And that's obviously going to have a big statement on not only the Orioles, but every franchise. But in the meantime, you referenced the Masson thing. That's still got to get clarified. This franchise, before we even talk about moving, this thing cannot be sold until that finally gets clarified. And so just the quick update on that one. We had oral arguments up here in New York right after the All-Star game, middle of July. The Nationals are trying to get the latest arbitration RSDC ruling from the league in their favor. They're trying to get that confirmed by the court. The Orioles and Masson are obviously trying to get that overturned and have this matter sent to a neutral third party, which they have been. But it's still hanging out there. And
there's no prediction on it, right? Like, you're a really smart guy. You're a lawyer. You've covered this inside out for 15 years. I haven't. I know there's a lot of money, and it's all in the Angelos family's coffers. And everybody's trying to get it. And they've been trying to get it piece by piece or, a dollar at a time. Has Masson even paid the Nationals over the last 3 or 4 years? There was some thought that they were withholding all of the money other than the first 19 or 20, some paltry figure, right? And that paltry figure is the same figure they give the Orioles,
right? They're getting the base level of rights fees, which the original sort of Bortz formula, supposedly spit out. It's that basically the delta between what the original formula spit out and what the Nationals and the RSDC believe they should be getting.
But it's ridiculously low. It's like $30 million or something. It's right. Against what it could be or what the Astros are getting or what other teams are getting. It's very paltry for the Nationals, right? For the Nationals, if they had their market,
to their market size, yes. But again, the question. But there's also profit distributions which both teams get. Those have been paid out as well. But really the sort of the end sausage on all of this, which is really kind of the fulcrum of this whole legal debate, is if the Nationals were to get what a lot of people would consider quote-unquote market value, what does that do in turn to the profit margin of Masson? And does that profit margin stand similarly to every other team-owned RSN in the league? And that's a big component of the Orioles' argument on this. And what does that end up doing to the bottom of the ledger, so to speak? And that's kind of where we are. And without that being known and resolved, it's pretty much impossible in my mind to have this team be sold, certainly sold for anything relative to full market value, because that's a big revenue piece that's just still undefined.
Well, I mean, the undefined part is also the actual value of the franchise, right? So, I mean, let's take this really at 100,000 feet. I mean, I call it, by the way, Eric Fisher's here. He is now SBG, Eric Fisher SBG, and that's FISHER. There's no C in there. Make sure you find him at Sport Business for all the inside skinny and all this. And For 100,000 feet at Major League Baseball, a franchise is for sale. It is on the market. That unto itself is pretty unique, right? Like, just the fact that any of these things, when they hit the market, who is that guy? Who is that, in our case, Eli Jacobs, Jerry Hoffberger, Edward Bennett Williams? Eric, identify that's the Steve Ballmer guy who would want to own a baseball team at this point, or are we talking about Corporation X and City Y, or, not that Under Armour would buy a baseball team, but who buys a baseball team at this point if it's not a do-gooder in the community? Because that's kind of what it used to be. It used to be a sportsman's thing for rich guys. Dude, $1.5 billion, $1.8 billion of liquidity lying around, that's a whole different level of rich than what's even Steve Bisciotti had laying around 15 years ago, right?
Yeah, it really is coming out of the venture capital world and the tech world now. I could very easily foresee a situation. Again, you look at a situation where, again, using Milwaukee as an example, you had Mark Atanasio, you had a guy from Los Angeles who, was from the financial world, comes in as not a native Milwaukeean, but really has done a lot, between his own activities and outside partners to try to work himself into that community, and I could foresee some out-of-towner who's made a lot of money in these other areas coming in, having interest in the Orioles, again, should all these things be defined, as we're talking about, coming in, having interest, and then working with some of the names that you mentioned to sort of buttress that local component on this. We just had a situation, it's soccer, it's a different sort of thing, but we just had a thing the other day with the Seattle Sounders where they've got some out-of-town ownership, but they just buttressed that up with a lot of guys with local ties to help fill out that ownership group, and it becomes sort of a two-tiered thing. I could very easily see a situation like that for the Orioles, again, should these things get clarified.
Well, and at the heart of all of this, if someone is willing to bet $1 billion, $1.5 billion on the Baltimore Orioles, the thought of moving them or keeping them here, it feels to me, if a guy bets on them, chances are he doesn't want to move the team. Chances are Major League Baseball would, unless Major League Baseball really wants to move the team. And quite frankly, Major League Baseball's got two other fires, right? Like, you want to move a team, move Oakland. Nobody would care. You want to move a team, move Tampa. Nobody would care, right? But Oakland's different because it's across the bay from another team. But Tampa, that's the dumpster fire in the league more so than the Orioles, which has sort of been on the back burner, right?
Without question. In fact, you've actually got Tampa Bay out there publicly saying they are interested in at least a partial move to Montreal. They have asked for and received executive council permission to explore such a scenario. So it's a very different scenario. And then again, there's no facility. The other thing you have to remember with the Orioles, for all the issues that we've discussed, both management-wise and competitively, you still have Camden Yards. It doesn't need to be built. It exists. It needs a little TLC, but it's still, the bones of it are still pretty good. That's a decent starting point relative to these other markets that we talked about that don't have a facility.
Well, and look, you're a sport business guy, so you're seeing this thing at the $1 billion level and reporting on how the city of Atlanta got sold out for the county of Cobb and a development that created all sorts of mixed use. There's people sitting there having a cup of coffee right now, people ordering a donut right now, people living above it, and that's not only in baseball season, that happens during football season. We were there for the Super Bowl, and I went out there and saw it all. So, that's not necessarily going to happen to Camden Yards. But, Eric, I don't know if you know or not. I've been working on Baltimore Positive here the last 9 months. My city is in distress. I don't, I'm sure you follow the Twitter feed of the Orange Con Man down the street talking about Elijah Cummings and where my city is. I would think that part of this, and I know that you were in on the front end of this and you watched many games at Camden Yards as a younger man because it was all you had as a Washington Times reporter at that time, right? What Camden Yards did for my community, and I was 23 years old at the time. I was new to radio. I came on the radio in 91. I started at the newspaper in the 80s. I remember the Colts leaving. I remember everything that happened in the 80s about trying to lure a football team back, trying to get Camden Yards built, trying to keep the Orioles out of D.C. with Edward Bennett Williams, trying to, then we get Camden Yards. Now we got to fill it. Now we got to sell it. Now the team's going to get sold. Our owner went broke. Who's this guy from Highlandtown, this Greek guy that's going to buy the team and receivership and the All-Star game? And then the strike happens, right? And baseball for Baltimore, I mean, it was one and the same. The city was going to be saved by the Orioles coming downtown. That was part of the aquarium and linking the harbor and all of this stuff. And Eric, I'm sitting in the middle of it. My studio literally is at the Inner Harbor, as you know. And I know what's happened to property value here: safety, crime, education, business, the harbor, Harbor Place is in receivership. All of this is going on while the Orioles are losing.
Been the same since Freddie Gray.
Right. Well, the Orioles are losing 23-2, and Chris Davis is beating up the manager, and Yankees fans are laughing, and there's only 8,000 of them at the ballpark, right? Like, it's been outrageous. But I also know that with this team, the flag being up, that the team's for sale, this is also a chance for some Dan Gilbert kind, right? The way Dan Gilbert came in and saved Detroit. This is a chance for some rich guy to put the flag down in Baltimore, or some company or group or consortium, and say, we're going to rebuild the Orioles bigger and better. We're going to make it come downtown. Billy Joel's not going to be the only thing that brings 37,000 people downtown. And we're going to revitalize downtown Baltimore using Camden Yards, a baseball team, 81 summer nights to help the bay, the water, the boats, the restaurants, the hotels, and, by the way, to help West Baltimore and East Baltimore, too, because kids sell peanuts, kids make money. There's economic opportunity here that doesn't involve a gun and doesn't involve running drugs on the street, because we can get people back downtown again. That was the promise of Camden. That sounds ludicrous now, right? Like, sounds like I'm running for mayor or something, Eric. But that 30 years ago, that was the sell. The sell was, hey, you see this beaten up, place where rats are running, where Babe Ruth, hey, we're going to build the ballpark, and like 3.6 million people are going to flood downtown and like make a community whole. That all happened. Now, can it happen again? And this is the time where these two boys are going to hold the keys to the car up. And if a Dan Gilbert comes in here and says, let's make Baltimore great again, I mean, as a citizen, I want to hear that. I want to hear about the train that connects Camden Yards to D.C. in 14 minutes. You know what I mean? With a speed train. I want to hear about how we make Baltimore great again, because 30 years ago, and you're in the business of sport business, this whole thing about making Baltimore awesome began with the Orioles. It really did. It began with sports, right?
Well, and it really rippled through the whole downtown redevelopment with the whole stadium thing that obviously began with Camden Yards. To your point, we've come around now. The generation has turned, and a lot of these other original folks, they're in different stages now. Texas, they've gone in a different direction, and they're doing the cityscape thing, like you mentioned with the Braves. The Rockies have kind of hung on, and, lower Denver is still, popping pretty well. But Cleveland's wrestling through this now. They've got to do some, they've tried to do some work on their ballpark, but even with a good team, they're struggling with some attendance there.
If LeBron James could play center field, dude, I'm telling you, man, they would sell tickets out there.
Yeah, but again, we've sort of come around. The generation has cycled through now, and I think, again, this gets right back to who is the owner and what is the vision. And if it's not going to be the boys, who is it going to be? And that person needs to be. There's a lot, to your point, there's a lot of retail politics on this, that not only do we not know who's really running the show, John and Lewis haven't been out front very much, and there's a lot of, again, retail politicking, that particularly given all the stressors that you describe, that need to be out there and selling this thing. And you think about what happened, again, with these rebuilds with the Cubs and the Astros that went so well. Part of that, the reason why it went so well, is that Ricketts in Chicago and Jim Crane in Houston, they were out there, basically, for the opening of a door, and they were out there selling hope and faith, and people bought in.
To business owners, not just to the fans, to the stakeholders, to people that are going to spend real money. Not somebody that's going to come down there and give you $20 for a bobblehead 4 times a year and, buy a $1 bag of I mean, no offense to that fan, right? I am that fan. My old man and I, we bought the senior citizen, the child plan, my dad was a steelworker. My dad had nothing but the Orioles. The Orioles were the central focus of my dad's life after he lost his son, So, I know how important it can be. It's been that important to my life. But it has to be important to the community. Eric, I built my life around sports, right? I founded this company 29 years ago, right? Around the Baltimore Orioles. It's all we had. You know, we were never getting a football team here. Jack Kent Cooke was never going to let that happen. Paul Tagliabue was never going to let that happen. And then it happened, like a miracle, right? Because Governor Schaefer willed it. He kept Cook out of Laurel. He told him he wasn't going to have roads. I mean, all of this construct of the Ravens and the Orioles and Camden Yards, we all see it as, oh, it just happened. I mean, come on, man. You know the political capital it took back in the 80s and 90s to make that happen, and we know Baltimore doesn't have that kind of juice right now.
But, again, it could if we had, again, some clear leadership. At least it would be a step in the right direction, and I think this is where, again, getting right back to the beginning of this conversation, that's where this franchise is right now in terms of having a clear direction. We can sort of lampoon the Rays, again, using that comparison, and, the dumpster fire, but Stu Sternberg is out there. He's at least selling a plan. We may not like the plan, but at least he's out there selling a plan. And, step one in this whole thing is getting some clear management direction as to who's running the show. And then step two is getting this Masson thing resolved one way or the other. And then if and when those two things get into place, then you can start thinking about what are the best corrective moves to try to get this ship righted.
Eric Fisher here. He is Sport Business. Eric Fisher, SBG, is the new way to find him out on Twitter. For the owners, how greedy are they? I'm just asking. I'm around the NFL owners, and I know exactly how greedy they are. I watch it at every turn, with every concussion, with every Colin Kaepernick, with every Jay-Z Super Bowl signing that makes it, they blackballed a player in front of everybody. So all of this has happened, right? But the baseball owners, boy, if they were greedy, I think that, we would know it. I mean, really greedy. We'd know it by now, but I don't know where their level of greed is and where they see their opportunity in Austin, in Nashville, in Portland. I had Maury Brown on earlier this week. Like, the NFL owners always used L.A. The baseball owners couldn't figure out what to do with a franchise 18 years ago when it was dying in Montreal. It was a joke, and they peddled it everywhere and wound up plopping it down and creating these unintentional consequences of wrecking my city, right? I mean, literally, right? Like, 15 years later, my city's on fire. Nobody's going to the baseball games. We don't even have an owner. And the Nationals are doing pretty well and look like they're okay. And we're talking about maybe my franchise not being here in 5 or 10 years, maybe. But these other cities sit out there. How enamored with Mexico City are they? I mean, or are they so consumed with getting nets up and trying to figure out how to keep labor peace? It doesn't feel like it's well run right now, Eric. I guess that's just what I'm saying. It doesn't feel like it's as growth oriented as when I'm around the NFL and the NBA people, when the place is really well run,
Well, they've said themselves that it's tough to think about expansion or new markets or any of that sort of thing unless and until Tampa and Oakland get done. These are two stadium situations that have been, in rough shape for 20 plus years, and in the case of the Rays, really since the day they came into existence.
Well, my question would be, why wouldn't they just move them then? You know what I mean? Like, what is it that bad? Is the market that bad where, like, Nashville's never going to build a stadium? But is that the reality that they look at it and say?
Tampa, I think they don't want to give up on a top 15 media market that, again, for all the issues that they've had there, that there's still a lot of people in Tampa, and they still... it's along the same lines why they haven't given up on Miami either, that, these are two very large media markets and that they don't want to give up on that unless it really gets to be that level of direness. But
by the way, if I were in the room with them, and if I were one of their guys or consulting with them, I would say that they're the only two places you guys got left where kids can actually play baseball, not California and Arizona, maybe Texas. But, like, you can't quit on baseball in Florida because that's where kids play it. You know what I mean? Like, for me, because I live in a place, as you know, where everybody's got a lacrosse stick. Literally, right? Like, baseball's over here as a kids playing it in Highlandtown. They're not. They're playing soccer, they're playing lacrosse, or they're playing basketball. That's what they're doing. I'm worried more about baseball at that level of a $1.8 billion investment in the city where, like, 15 years from now, who's going to be on the field? I think baseball has a real problem with that I see with my eyes.
Well, you have some local market data that perhaps I don't. I will tell you, though, from a national standpoint, the youth piece of it has actually been one of the real good news pieces for the league. They've actually been up in nationwide youth participation the last 4 years running. I would actually submit that since Rob Manfred has become commissioner, this youth piece and what he's done to align with the Little League and focus on that piece of it, arguably the best thing he's done in the 4+ years he's been commissioner. Again, you may have
I'm in a depressed market here where, like, nobody goes to the games, and we do have lacrosse. I mean, like, it's unique, as you know, but lacrosse here has become the sport on my timeline for every person I know that I used to go to Oriole games with who played baseball as a kid. Their kid plays lacrosse. That's just a reality in Baltimore.
Yeah, again, you may be speaking to some local market specifics. The trend line, even compared to lacrosse, certainly compared to football, compared to soccer, baseball has been on a pretty decent double-digit percentage uptick over the last 3-4 years.
That's good to know. I appreciate you. I trust your information implicitly. I do.
So, but again, this is where having good, strong, visible local ownership would help, because then, the owner and the team president would be showing up at Little League. They'd be showing up at a field dedication there, or field reconstruction, these kinds of things that are happening a lot in the other markets. I mean, again, you look at a situation like Los Angeles and what they've done with their the Dodgers and their Dream Foundation, literally rebuilding dozens and dozens of fields all across various parts of Los Angeles. And they have these events, and Mark Walter and Stan Casson and these kind of senior level folks are showing up at all this stuff. That kind of thing is not happening in Baltimore.
Eric, last thing for you, and I do appreciate your time. You're always so generous. I want to talk 50,000 feet, move down a little bit on the baseball side, and just saying fixing the game and where we are. One of the real issues here is this rebuild thing that you can say to your fans, we're going to serve really, really, really bad food for 1,000 days, and you're going to eat it. But one day our coffee will be good again. And I've seen people beating up the Orioles this week because they're playing the Yankees, and it looks like, a big league team and a AA team, right? And to anybody's eyes, if the Orioles and the Yankees played each other 162 times, it would be a slaughter, right? I don't know what is said in the offices of Major League Baseball, but it's almost like when I went to the preseason games this week with the Ravens, I'm like, I don't know how the NFL gets together and thinks this is a good optic. It's not a good optic. Now, whether they're willing to do anything about it, and they're all getting so rich in so many cases, and I think that's this century's world of baseball where everybody's making money, so it's okay to have empty preseason games and no one at your games because we got television revenue. But there does come a point where the optics of 10 teams not trying in baseball is very, very real to all of us who witness it.
Well, that's certainly the Scott Boras argument. The Orioles thing, it's kind of weird. I was looking at some of the numbers that if, the Orioles, yes, obviously they're in a rebuild, and as we're taping this, they're 3-28 combined against the Yankees, the Twins, and the A's, 3 teams that look to be headed towards the playoffs. Actually been pretty decent against everybody else. Winning record against Toronto, competitive against Cleveland. Actually had a 12-12 month in July that, for whatever reason, the Yankees in particular, just, who they obviously played 19 times this year, just completely had their number. And I'm not saying, the Orioles are a playoff team otherwise, they still got the worst ERA in the league, but it's interesting how they've actually been something of a more credible team against everybody else compared to those couple of teams that I mentioned.
Well, you're selling it up, but it stinks, dude. Eric Fisher, SBG, is here. Hey, thanks for all of your insights on this. And I'm an alarmist in that someone's going to buy the team, and I need to know what their intentions are. And I often think, like, it couldn't be any worse than what it's been. It's got to be better than what this is, because whatever this is,
you want a vision. That's the thing. Is like what I'm hearing and what I'm obviously seeing elsewhere as well is that there's just. What is the vision? What are you buying into? And again, this gets back to, I think the Ricketts thing is partially instructive here. And again, I referenced the Brewers before, that Anasio, when he came in, he was out there, he sold a vision. And right now, nobody's even trying to sell you a vision. And that's the unfortunate thing right now.
Is this the point where I get biblical, which I rarely do, and say where there is no vision, the people perish?
Something like that.
There you go. All right, well, I use that one. That is true. Eric, appreciate you. Tell us about sport business and give us the sort of lowdown on your new place, your new home, which I think is awesome, and it's just more of a global thing going on, right?
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's a chance for me personally to have a bigger role and really kind of build something. I mean, I had a great run at SBJ, but I walked into an established thing, which while I was there became even more established. But this is a brand new thing, at least here in the United States, where I can kind of come in and build something at the ground floor. And again, it's some new skills for me personally. I'm still doing a lot of writing, but I'm also working with a lot of other writers and doing editing and doing some things that I had not previously done in my career. And so it's an exciting new challenge. So I'm excited.
It's nice. New challenges are the best kind. Eric, take care of yourself. Thanks for always answering our call and bringing up the level of conversation. It was some great information. And I did not know that youth participation was up, so I'm going to Google that and learn a little bit more about that. And the reason I don't know is because I live in Baltimore. So,
Yes, indeed.
Eric, take care of yourself. I hope to be talking about the Baltimore Orioles with you more. Be well.
Fair enough.
Eric Fisher, SBG, the way to find him at Sport Business. You can find me out on the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day. From anywhere in the world, we have taken a deep dive on the future of the Baltimore Orioles. I'm going to be writing more as I learn more. I've threatened that this week. I'm not at the point where I feel like I have anything definitive to write. I'm at the point. So everybody should be at the point at this point. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. No problem finding me. Nasty at WNST.net always rings me. Morning newspaper, we're revamping it. The website, revamping that. Baltimore Positive is there. Man, talk about bigger and better. We're doing a lot of cool stuff around here. We're at Fadley's, we're at Jennings, and we're at State Fair all month long. Learn more at Baltimore Positive. Senator Chris Van Hollen this week. You'll hear that this weekend at WNST. Get on our text service, and when the Orioles are sold, we'll send you the text. It's all brought to you by Coons Florida Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here from Thursday, 3 until 5, getting you ready for crappy preseason football all month long, but then getting you ready for real stuff next month. Dennis Colazzo's here with the SSV on WNST. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.